You know, when you're facing infertility, the answers aren't always right there on the surface. They're hidden. So today, we're going to go on a journey to map that unseen landscape. We're going to explore a procedure that literally creates a window into the female reproductive system.
And that's the big question, right, for so many people? The answers aren't always simple. They can lie within the very structures designed to create life. So how in the world do you get a clear picture? How do you create a map of this unseen territory?
Well, a lot of the time, the answer comes from a procedure with a really long name. Hysterosalpingography, or HSG for short. Just think of it like a special kind of X-ray. It uses a dye to create a live map of the uterus and the fallopian tubes. It shows their shape, their size, and most importantly, if the pathways are clear. This is our tool for the journey.
All right, so how exactly does this thing give us that window to within? Let's dive in and break down how it actually works.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this little instrument, a thin, flexible plastic catheter. Its design is actually really clever. It allows for the dye to be introduced so gently that it often means more invasive tools aren't needed. And that, right there, is a huge step forward for patient comfort.
The procedure itself is a really careful step-by-step process. First, the catheter gets positioned, then that radio-opaque dye, the stuff that shows up bright white on an X-ray, is slowly introduced. After that, a special X-ray machine called a fluoroscope watches in real time as the dye flows through. And finally, specific images, or radiographs, are snapped to create our map.
Okay, so before we can start spotting any roadblocks or, weird detours on our map, we have to know what the standard territory looks like. So let's establish our baseline, the normal blueprint. And here it is. This is the image we're going to compare everything else to. See that smooth, inverted triangle? That's the uterine cavity. The dye then flows out into those two thin pathways. Those are the fallopian tubes. And here's the key part. Notice how the dye spills out at the very end? That is the crucial sign that the tubes are open. This is our perfect, normal blueprint. All right, we've got our blueprint. So our first stop on this tour is the uterus itself. We're going to see how the HSG can show us issues with the shape and the texture of the uterine cavity, which is the very place an embryo needs to implant. This is where the power of this map really becomes clear. On the left, you see our normal smooth cavity. Now look to the right. See how the dye has to flow around all those small, dark shapes? These are called filling defects, and in this case, they're endometrial polyps. The map immediately shows us that there are obstacles in the way. Here's another example for you. Again, normal is on the left, but on the right, the cavity's shape isn't a clean triangle anymore, is it? It's lumpy, it's distorted. This is the classic signature of submucous myomas, a type of fibroid that grows into the uterine cavity and can definitely interfere with implantation. And in this image, the dye shows us something else entirely. Instead of a smooth space, there's this big filling defect that almost looks like a web. This is caused by synechia, which is basically a fancy term for intrauterine adhesions, or bands of scar tissue. They can form after a surgery or an infection, and they act just like roadblocks inside the uterus.
But here's the thing. While the HSG gives us the map, you need an expert to read it, because sometimes what it shows isn't a simple roadblock, it's a genuine medical mystery.
Okay, get ready for this one. The HSG on the left showed this strange thin line inside the uterus. It wasn't a polyp, it wasn't a fibroid, so what was it? Well, further investigation found the unbelievable cause. A tiny fragment of bone. You can see it magnified here. A truly rare finding, and it was only discovered because of the map the HSG created.
So far, we've been looking at things growing inside the uterus, but the HSG is also absolutely essential for showing us its fundamental shape, which can actually vary a lot from person to person, right from birth.
Two really common variations are the septate and the bicornuate uterus. A septate uterus has a band of tissue, a septum, that divides the cavity. A bicornuate uterus is more indented at the top, kind of giving it a heart shape. And the key difference, as the source points out, often comes down to the angle between the two horns of the uterus. And here's what that actually looks like on the X-ray. On the left, you've got the septate uterus. See how the two sides form a really sharp, acute angle? Now compare that to the bicornuate uterus on the right, where the angle up top is much wider. That single detail is absolutely crucial for getting the right diagnosis. And then sometimes you find something even more dramatic. Just compare our normal blueprint on the left with the image on the right. This is a uterus didelphys, a condition where there are two separate uterine cavities and each one has its own cervix. You can even see here that two catheters had to be used to fill both structures.
Okay, so we've mapped the uterine cavity. Now for the final, checking the pathways that lead out of it, the fallopian tubes. This is where fertilization happens, so making sure they're open is critical. And this map can show us some really specific problems inside the tubes themselves. Look closely at this image, right where the tubes connect to the uterus. You see those tiny pockets where the dye is collecting? This points to a condition called salpingitis isthmica nodosa. It's essentially a type of swelling that can create blockages. And yeah, it's very strongly linked to infertility.
And this brings us to a really important point. Creating an accurate map, well, it's an art. The source material just hammers this home. The technique of the person performing the HSG is everything. Too little dye, and you get an incomplete map. Too much, and you can actually hide the very details you're looking for.
For example, just check this out. In the image on the left, the first injection filled the tubes, but there's no clear spill. It's inconclusive. But then, when the operator adds just a bit more dye, look what happens on the right. The ends of the tubes just swell up like balloons. Now the diagnosis is crystal clear: bilateral hydrosalpinx, which means both tubes are blocked and filled with fluid. The right technique revealed the whole story.
And it goes the other way too. On the left, this does not look good. The left tube isn't filling at all, which suggests a blockage. But a skilled radiologist recognized that this study was incomplete. After injecting more dye, the image on the right tells the real story. That blockage was just an air bubble, and both tubes are perfectly normal and open. A skilled mapmaker literally prevented a devastating misdiagnosis.
So, as the source material concludes, the HSG is this uniquely powerful tool. It evaluates the entire reproductive pathway. And what's so fascinating is that beyond just diagnosing problems, the very act of flushing the system can sometimes clear minor blockages, making the test itself therapeutic. In the end, that's what this is all about, isn't it? It's not just about images on a screen. It's about creating a clear, detailed map of a hidden landscape.